And joining us now on the debate in the nation's capital, Amy Epstein, a Carleton University master's student in psychology. In North Bay, Ontario, via Skype, Rhiannon Dawn, seminar instructor in English Studies at Nipissing University. With us here in studio, Arthur Gallant, college journalism student who is taking a year off to regroup, as he says, and Emma Woolley, a writer and web editor. It's good to have everybody both here in the studio and in Points Beyond and Points Out of Town. You all heard the interview that I just did with Gita from the University of Western Ontario. Amy, why don't I start with you? Pick up on something that you heard in that interview and follow up. What caught your interest?
Well, I'd like to bring up the idea that perhaps the reason that we're seeing an increase in mental health issues is because students are graduating a year earlier than they did when OAC was in place.
You think that's a big factor, eh?
I don't actually. I'd have to say that in my experience, the research tends to suggest that there may be more of a generational issue that is at play here rather than the additional year that is spent in high school. And what I mean by this is the students that are currently in university are known as members of the millennial generation. And it is possible that this cohort of students, while in turn perhaps not completing an OAC year depending on when they graduated, have grown up in what research tends to refer to as a very privileged generation, not having experienced many obstacles or hurdles in their lifetime that were, I guess, confronted by individuals in past generations, such as the Depression and World War II. The generation that is currently in university perhaps hasn't learned the types of coping strategies that are necessary in order to successfully adjust to the pressures and expectations that university presents.
Okay, good observation. We'll follow up on that later. Rhiannon, in North Bay, what did you want to pick up on in the interview?
The thing that I thought was really interesting was the emphasis on the community approach to it, the fact that it can't just be one or two people picking up on someone's behavior. It needs to be, as she put it, a net of people. And I think that that's something that's been really true from my experience here at Nipissing, dealing with students.
Okay, Emma?
One thing that really jumped out at me was that there wasn't much of a mention of the role that university plays now is a lot different than it was in previous generations. You know, university is now supposed to be the ticket to a good job and the ticket to a good life, and so there's a lot more pressure. So it's a little bit more than a generational and privilege difference. I think it's the way that we've positioned post-secondary institutions as well.
And when you say the way we have done it, who are you referring to there?
I'm referring to society and government on the whole, pushing everyone early out of high school straight into university.
Parents, friends, family, you want to put them on the list too?
Family, teachers, everyone.
Everybody. Okay. Arthur?
I just think students are coming to colleges and universities now with more challenges. I don't necessarily think they're different challenges than what necessarily our parents experienced, but I think we're identifying them, we're opening our professors to them, and I just think we're carrying a lot of baggage. For example, now that we're going through we just went through a recession, very difficult economic times. I think students are now having to be more financially accountable and more responsible to themselves
than
necessarily our parents were, and that adds to the stress. There's so many pressures now that I think that we're facing in our generation that our parents didn't necessarily face when they were in our shoes, and if they did, I don't necessarily think it was talked about. I think we're more open today to talking about those pressures than we were 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Rhiannon, you heard some of the numbers that I said at the beginning of my interview with Gita, and I want to add just one more set of numbers to the mix here. Here's the percentage of North American students diagnosed with anxiety in the past year. This was in McLean several months ago. Percentage of North American students diagnosed with anxiety. In the year 2000, it was 4.3%. In the year 2010, 10.3%. Almost more than a twofold increase. What does that say to you, Rhiannon?
It tells me that I have students who have a really unique set of challenges because anxiety tends to present itself really differently in different students. Some students have anxiety challenges that deal specifically with exams or testing situations. Some of them have anxiety that deals specifically with speaking in front of classes and things like that. And that's only two possibilities there. There's lots of different ways that that presents itself. And it's the one thing that I've really learned that I didn't anticipate when I started this is that you can't really have hard and fast rules about accommodations for students. It really does have to be on a case-by-case basis in order to come up with something that is that is workable for both me, for the program, and for the student.
Emma, as long as there are exams and as long as there are deadlines by which essays have to be submitted, there's going to be anxiety. Students will be anxious. But presumably there's a difference between that kind of sort of regular run-of-the-mill anxiety and something beyond, right? Do you see that?
Yes, that's definitely true. And really the only person who can determine that is a medical professional. But it is hard to draw that line, as you mentioned in the interview earlier. How do you know if I'm just anxious because I have a test or I'm anxious because of life and things that are happening in my brain that I don't know how to explain? And I think that may be getting reported more now because people are becoming more and more comfortable with admitting that, yes, maybe this is anxiety and maybe I do need treatment for this.
Amy, you're a master's student, right?
I am.
That can be fairly tense, I would think, from time to time. How are you managing your anxiety levels?
I think it's all about finding the necessary coping strategies in order to remain productive. I think stress is a normative experience, and every one of us, grad student or not, is going to experience stress at various times in their life. But it's when the stress becomes, when the stress affects your ability to be productive and to remain functional, that it ends up being a disruption and a precursor for chronic anxiety.
Now, there's stress in high school too, of course. There's the peer pressure, and of course you've got exams and you've got essays you got in high school as well. Is the stress that you think people experience in the post-secondary world different, more intense than what they experienced in high school?
Well, as was mentioned, I think everyone experienced different types of stress and anxiety on a case-by-case basis. So to generalize and say that the anxiety or stress experienced in high school is different than university, I mean, the expectations are different. The level of competition is different. I think students in high school, especially in this day and age, are kind of in a protective bubble in a way. They are treated by their teachers, parents, friends, in a way that promotes equity among students and trying to motivate as opposed to provide constructive feedback and criticism. So I think it's a big, I want to say, adjustment for students who enter university and aren't used to that kind of competitive overtone. It's difficult for a lot of students to adjust with regards to what high school was like before they began in this type of context.
I understand. Let me go to Arthur on this because you're, I guess, what do we want to call it? You're in the middle of a reboot year, something like that? You were a community college student, and now you've taken off for a while. How come?
There's just a lot of stressors at home that I felt like were affecting my ability on campus.
So it wasn't in the classroom?
It wasn't in the classroom. I think the campus, what was happening on campus played a role in my stress. I think there's certain factors on campus such as scheduling. I mean, sometimes I would only have 4 hours of class a day, but was on campus for 10 hours a day, just because the timetables were made up of when our professors were available. Some of them were part-time professors who were just coming in out of their full-time jobs to teach us, to give us that hands-on experience. But I mean, there's stressors that I was dealing with at home, such as financial. I mean, I think we've acknowledged this, you've acknowledged it on several shows. The financial burden that students are taking on is just enormous. So here I am, I'm trying to pay down my debt, But how can I do that when I'm on campus 10 hours a day? I'm then going to a job for 4 or 5 hours, 3 nights a week, and then I'm going home to do 3 hours of homework, and I have to be back on campus the next day at 8 a.m. I'm only getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep. So there was that, and it was just, you know.
That's a heavy load, Arthur.
It's a heavy load, and then there's just other day-to-day stresses. And I felt like I was able to function on campus, but I wasn't able to function to the best of my ability.
So tell me, when you started to realize that we got a problem here, you know, something's got to give, did you go to a counselor at the community college you attended?
I actually met with the coordinators of my program for the second time this year. Last year, what ended up happening was they gave me a 6-week leave of absence in which I was able to work from home, which I really valued. But I don't need to tell you, as a journalist, that this year what we're doing was all hands-on. We were producing a 1-hour radio show every day. We were producing a TV show at another part of the semester, and that was something I was unable to do from home. I wanted to be on campus, but I just wasn't able to function. So I mean, the college wanted to offer me support on campus, but because of the wait list, they were only able to offer me minimal resources, and were able to refer me outside of campus. But if I'm going to be in college full time, it's really hard for me to then focus on my mental health and receiving help outside of campus. It's just really hard to balance everything.
Is it your plan to return to community college?
I absolutely intend to plan in September. I actually started receiving treatment yesterday, ironically enough. And you know, it's my goal to receive treatment. But I think as well, which is something that was mentioned, is that students are it seems like we're being put into a bit of a rush to finish our studies. I'm going to be 22 this month. And I mean, it's not going to be the biggest deal in the world if I graduate when I'm 23 compared to 22. I still have a lot of time ahead of myself. And I think it's a sign of maturity, not to toot my own horn, that I'm able to realize that I have these struggles and I need to take a year off to focus on myself.
I want to find out from Rhiannon. This probably is a story that sounds rather typical. Is that not that? Let me rephrase. Arthur, you're extraordinary. Let me put it that way. But my hunch is you're not the only kid in the world going through this right now. Rhiannon, you teach a lot of first-year students. Am I right about that?
Yeah, that's it's something that happens fairly frequently, I think. And I agree. I think it is a sign of maturity for people who are able to recognize that that you don't need to be the first to cross the finish line. And that sometimes taking the time to do something properly is a much more valuable experience than rushing to get it done right away.
Rhiannon, does it seem to you as if this generation, the millennial generation of students, has it tougher trying to negotiate their way through post-secondary life than, say, students of 25 years ago?
Well, technically speaking, I'm part of the millennial generation, so I don't know if I can speak for students of 25 years ago. But certainly, I do think they do have it tougher in a lot of ways. Education in terms of elementary and secondary education in Ontario has undergone an enormous number of changes, even in the last 10 to 15 years. And university education, in a lot of ways, and this is a sweeping generalization, and I recognize that, but essentially, it's really not all that different from what it was when it started. There's still one person often at the front of the classroom who's lecturing, and there's, I think, a really profound disconnect between what happens to our students in high school and what happens to them at the university level. And there's lots of things you can say about that. I certainly don't think that that high school does my students any favors with the way that they're prepared when they come to me. But at the same time, I think it's worth recognizing that that's not entirely their fault, that there is something profoundly wrong between the two that maybe needs to be addressed as well.
Well, let me follow up on that. Amy, did you find that, first of all, where'd you go to high school?
In Toronto.
Okay. Did you find that the high school that you went to adequately prepared you for the life that you were about to lead in the post-secondary world?
Absolutely not.
Is that why you didn't want to mention the name of the high school?
I did well in high school. I've always been an academic, so it wasn't necessarily about the types of expectations that the school had, but I certainly was not prepared for the pressure that I was kind of thrown into beginning university after graduating grade 12. It's sorry.
I was just going to say, and yet you told us earlier that you didn't think it was the fact that you graduated a year younger than all of those who once upon a time did grade 13 in OAC. That wasn't it. It's something else.
I honestly, I think it's more than that. I think it may be an issue for some individuals having that extra year in order to mature and develop, but I think it's more this, I guess, overwhelming idea that regarding millennial students, in that our attitudes and values are different than those of our parents' generation. We, you know, based on what we've experienced, and this is obviously a generalization, we are entering university because we're often obligated, or we feel as though it's expected of us. And picking up on something Arthur said earlier, it may be too fast depending on, you know, the particular individual, but not necessarily because of the age. I would say it might be more just because of where you are in your own life and the messages that you're receiving from your parents. Part of the expectation when you graduate high school is continuing education, whether it be in college or university. And I think our attitudes have been shaped as part of this generation to believe that that is our only option. And it's unfortunate, because I think with a little bit more freedom and independence and a lot of support from our parents, we could, I guess, avoid a lot of these adjustment difficulties that we're having in university.
Well, maybe one of the issues is that, you know, I don't know, I mean, you tell me, but, you know, if parents of the millennial generation had a much easier time of it at university and didn't experience the kind of anxiety that this generation seems to be suffering from, and admittedly, Amy's going to disagree with me here, but they also got 5 years of high school instead of 4, and therefore they might have been better prepared to go off to university. Is that all part of the mix here too?
I would say that definitely it is. We are making a lot of assumptions, though. I mean, we're talking about pampered, privileged kids. We're assuming that parents have gone to university. For example, mine never did. They never had that experience, and so they wouldn't have known how to prepare me. They did the best they could, but you know, they didn't have much in the way of advice. We're also not really addressing the kids who can't afford to go to university and are saddled with more debt. Or the ones who never make it at all, because that's not the best way that they learn. So I feel that those are also in the mix too, and we have to consider those when we talk about these generational differences.
No, that's a great point. But so, like, take your case. If your parents had no post-secondary experience and therefore couldn't advise you, and the high schools, which I'm hearing more and more, this is really quite unfortunate, but I'm hearing from more and more different sources that they don't adequately prepare people for the shock that is post-secondary world. Who's supposed to do it?
I think that they try. Schools try very hard. When I was in high school, we had a careers course, we had a civics course, we had different streams that were aimed at university and college, again, ignoring other education opportunities for different students. And they try to prepare you that it's going to be different, but in my experience, it simply wasn't enough. And I think that it's everyone's job. It's the student's job, it's the parent's job, and it's the teacher's job.
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to high school in Innisfil.
In Innisfil, okay, so about an hour north of these studios, maybe a little bit more. You were a good high school student?
Very good. I graduated with a 95 average.
A 95 average?
And I had maybe 70 in my first year.
At university?
It was quite a shock.
Where'd you go?
I went to Nipissing.
You did?
Yes.
Okay. Shout out to Rhiannon. Well, obviously there was a disconnect somewhere. You're an excellent high school student and an average university student. What happened?
It was just so different. I noticed in the last few years of high school, they were really prepping us with critical thinking and essay writing, but when you get to university, it's entirely different. The theory is different and the framework is different. And when I was getting my grades back, I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. And then I just got stuck in this space where I was like, maybe I'm not smart. Maybe I just shouldn't be here in the first place.
Started to doubt yourself.
Yes, and I lost a scholarship because of it, and then it just got harder and harder.
What happened then?
I plugged on through. In what was supposed to be my third year, I actually had a similar experience to Arthur where I took off an entire year to try to get it together.
And did you?
Somewhat. I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I was dealing with a lot of real mental health issues at the time that I didn't know existed. So I finished my degree and moved down here, took a postgraduate program in college, and I'm now working in that field.
At some point along this continuum, you got diagnosed
Yes.
as having some mental health issues.
Yes.
How did that happen?
It happened when I moved to Toronto and finished school and had a number of breakdowns, and I had the time to go into CAMH and ask someone to help me.
Let me just stop you there for a second. You said you had a number of breakdowns.
Yes.
Manifest how?
In losing the ability to cope with life, not wanting to get up in the morning, and when you do get up, wondering what's the point, or being too anxious, like what's going to happen if I go out and do X. I was officially diagnosed with bipolar II disorder, which is characterized by extreme uncontrollable mood swings and anxiety and depression. So when I say breakdowns, they're never quite the same.
You know, there will be a generation of people watching this program right now who will say, this is all fancy talk for this generation just doesn't want to pull its socks up high enough. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
What do you say to them?
I say it's difficult to explain to the person who had to walk 20 miles to school in their underwear in the snow without any shoes on.
Yeah, that's right.
Uphill both ways.
Yes, of course. It's really hard to talk about your problems with them because theirs were so much worse. But I mean, making comparisons like that isn't fair for either party. Your hurt is still your hurt. So that is difficult. I don't think we've figured out a way to do that yet, and that might have to do with why people are still struggling with how to talk about it.
Amy, what do you say to the folks who think you should just sort of suck it up?
I'd say it's important to recognize that I agree that you can't compare generations 25 years ago to now with regards to who had it tougher. We definitely have had different experiences, and I guess going back to some of the points made earlier, I think the overarching theme comes back down to our ability to cope with what we're experiencing, and it doesn't make our feelings now any less legitimate by comparing them to what was experienced by our parents' generation. But I think that it's important to focus now on being able to identify the types of strategies that we can introduce to students who are being faced with these university challenges in order to educate them on how they can better cope with all of the things that are thrown at them.
Rhiannon, do you want to also maybe help us out with this distinction between those who think, come on, suck it up a little bit and just, tighten your belt a bit, with a genuine mental health diagnosis which suggests you can't get out of bed in the morning because something is happening inside your brain that's making it hard for you to succeed. There are a lot of people who just won't appreciate that distinction. What do you want to say to them?
I think that I would say try not to judge too hard. It is a very different generation of people now, I think, and we've touched a little bit on issues of privilege and things like that. But it is ultimately, too, I think, worth recognizing that, like Amy says, these are still struggles. These are still things that that people have to go through in order to achieve the goals that they want. And very often they are doing the best they can, and sometimes the best they can do is not get out of bed in the morning.
Mm-hmm. Arthur, you got a thought on that?
I think that it is very hard to interpret whether a student is struggling or not. It's difficult. And I think what needs to happen is there needs to be some sort of training with our professors, because like I had mentioned earlier in the program, you're having professors who are only coming into the campus twice a week, but they're not really, what might seem like a rebellious student is a student who is crying out for help. For example, a student who's skipping school constantly, a student who's not handing in, any or few assignments, a student who is failing assignments.
Those should be telltale signs.
Those should be telltale signs. And there are rebel students out there, don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. But from my experience in the classroom, there have been students who have told me at the campus pub that they're struggling, yet in the classroom, they're complete jerks. And they're too scared to ask for help. And I've done it in the past, and I'm not afraid to say, I have done certain things to get attention because I'm too afraid to ask for help.
Did you know that's what it was?
For when I was
when you were
doing it
acting
at
out,
the time?
did you know it was a cry for help?
Absolutely, but I was too scared to ask for help. And I think an important conversation that we need to have is about the stigma involved in revealing that you have a mental health difficulty.
Okay, two things to follow up on here. Let me make a note of stigma because I'm going to come back to that. But you did talk about professors. And I want to find out, Amy, let's go to you first on this. If there were a student at Carleton University, that's where you are. If there were a student at Carleton who was having some of the issues that Arthur just described, do you think the teaching staff there is adequately trained or prepared to deal with that? And I'm not just talking about run-of-the-mill stuff here. I'm talking about serious, potentially diagnosable illnesses here. Do they know how to do that?
Are you specifically referring to educators and not administrators or individuals?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. If there's a student in a class at Carleton, does the person who's teaching whatever, political science, English at the front of that class, understand specifically enough the kind of problem that we're talking about tonight when they see it?
As far as I know, educators do not receive formal training at Carleton University for those types of situations. Whether professors have had past experiences with students who have presented similar types of behaviors and are thus able to better identify them, that would be on an individualized basis. But again, those types of individuals are not clear to students. We don't know whether a professor is familiar with the type of experiences and feelings and anxiety that we're experiencing. So how likely is it that I'm going to approach this person and divulge all of this information about my personal life when I'm not sure what kind of response I'm going to get from them?
Well, that's an excellent question. Rhiannon, again, same story for Nipissing. Do you think the staff up there are adequately trained to recognize trouble when they see it?
Not necessarily, no. It's something that gets talked about a little bit. For me, I think the only time that I've really talked to anybody about it was in the 2-day orientation that I had when I first got hired here. I have a list of phone numbers of people who are in student services that I can refer students to, but in terms of what I am prepared to deal with on my own, I would say not necessarily very much. In the past, I have certainly referred students to the services that we have here on campus, but I certainly don't feel prepared to deal with that in any meaningful kind of way other than to say, here are the people that you could talk to.
Emma, what's your experience on that?
It was very difficult because I didn't really seek any treatment until I was done being in school. And I came from a background where we didn't really talk about emotions, never mind mental illness and the like. And I didn't know what it was. I used to make jokes about, just being depressed or sad or I'm crazy without having any framework for what it actually was. So it took coming here and spending a lot of time on the internet, seeing what resources were available. And even then, I was placed on 3 different waiting lists, and it was well over a year before I actually saw anybody. Because when you do the triage process, unless you're at your wit's end, like if you are suicidal, you're not going to be treated right away.
And you were not?
No. So that's another problem, is that there's not enough preventative care, which is where university services can be especially helpful as long as you get there. And I think that talking about it is the way we're going to do that.
Arthur.
I think that sometimes we can be in denial, though, of just really how bad of shape we're in. I mean, I have established, I suffer from clinical depression and started feeling depressed in May. And a couple of my friends who know me said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I kept saying, "I'm fine." Even though I didn't think I was fine, I was still able to go along my life.
These were friends of yours?
These were friends of
mine.
mine.
So why did you tell them you were fine when you weren't?
Because I was scared. I didn't want them to worry about me. I think a lot of people are concerned about me when I say, I'm depressed, even though I haven't really acted out on that. People still get concerned. And I kept saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And then finally in October, I broke down and I finally said, I'm not fine. And I actually had 2 people come to me say, we saw this breakdown coming. And I said, even though I felt like I was in denial about how bad of shape I was really in. Why didn't you step in like you have in the past? Don't take my word for it, because once again, even though these are people I've known for years, I've established a relationship with, I find the more I have to ask for help, the harder it gets. And you talk about the triage system, and it's in there for a reason, but I think students may not, I think they're too afraid to really reveal just how troubled they are, or they could be in denial, or for one reason or another, may not want to alarm people by saying, no, I need to meet with someone today or this week, not next week or next month.
Well, let's just help people, again, who are on the outside looking in here, try to understand. When you say, I had a breakdown, what did that look like?
I lost 30 pounds. I was unable to keep food down. I was getting an IV administered once a day. I was gagging every time I ate. I was not sleeping. I was maybe sleeping 2 to 3 hours in a 36-hour period. I was crying for no reason. I got up in the morning wondering why I was just so emotional. I was crying at commercials. And it is kind of funny. I laugh at it now.
Oh, I'm not I'm laughing because I feel you.
You've been,
but, yeah.
You've been there.
Yes.
And that was the kind of breakdown I have. And I mean, we were talking earlier, or I was talking earlier with a friend, there's really no time limit on when these breakdowns can happen. I mean, I saw my doctor, I was hospitalized for a brief period of time, and there was really nothing physical. My psychiatrist had said it was just simply stress that was doing this to me.
So that was wrong.
So
Your psychiatrist was not correct when he said it was just stress.
I believe stress played a factor. I mean, I felt like I was stressed out because of my depression.
Oh, I see, okay.
But I just think that, yeah, I mean, mental illness can play a huge toll on someone's body. And I mean, I can go a month without having one of these breakdowns, or I can go 5 years without having these breakdowns. And I think it's really hard for faculty when, once again, going back to what I had said earlier, when you're displaying certain behaviors, or especially when, because I have revealed to faculty that I'm depressed, and I think my faculty members have been pretty accepting of that. But a lot of them question, if you were so happy yesterday, how can you be coming into the classroom today?
Right.
Well,
let me follow up on that thing you just, and I made a note of it here a few minutes ago, which was the stigma of all this. And Amy, I want to know whether or not, if a student goes up to, and I don't mean to pick on Carleton here, but you happen to go to the university, do you get the sense that if a student came up to a professor or anybody who worked for the university and said, I think I'm in trouble, is the stigma of doing that still so significant that you can't imagine lots of people doing that?
Well, I think educators do have a responsibility at any university to make sure that they don't take something like that lightly. I think that it's important for every member of the university, as well as the peers of students who may be showing signs of difficulty, to make sure that they're doing all they can to notify the individuals at counseling services in particular of these types of situations, so that someone who is qualified can intervene.
Rhiannon, is the stigma of acknowledging mental health problems still so significant that you can imagine lots of people on your campus just wouldn't do it?
Absolutely. I have dealt with a number of students who have talked to me about their mental health struggles. But they are few and far between, and depending on the type of things that they're struggling with, sometimes they do have legitimate accommodations through student services that we're expected to uphold under the Ontario Disabilities Act, which I've probably missed the name of. But even then, very often I have a hard time talking those students into using the accommodations that they have, because they even though it's been officially diagnosed, they still feel that kind of stigma where they don't want to be the kid who uses that extra time, even though they're entitled to it, which I was really surprised by.
Emma, was there any point during your personal story that you felt, I can't come forward about this? If I get stigmatized as being the mental health kid, I won't pass, they'll look at my essays differently, all that kind of stuff?
All of that happened. And I didn't want to admit that it was an illness. I wanted to think, this is, it's a phase, it's going to pass. But I mean, I had been experiencing symptoms for years at that point, and it really only got worse once I moved out on my own. And so pride did play a really, really big factor. I didn't want to be looked down on. I didn't want anyone to think I was weak. And most of all, I thought I was the only one who got to refer to me as crazy. So I didn't want to open up that can of worms for anyone. And even when I did get diagnosed and I got medication, I was referred to group therapy, and it had to happen during the day. So there was the challenge of, how do I explain this to my workplace? Which presents another challenge, and it's very similar to university. You require certain accommodations, but it's, do I want to talk about it? Will they be okay with me doing this?
How you doing now?
Great. I feel a lot better. I'm taking medication, and it's been quite a while since I went through the program. It's cognitive behavioral therapy, very useful. And it's a lot better, but I mean, this is a long-term disorder. It's not going to go away. It requires constant management.
And the medication does what for you?
For me, it's a mood stabilizer. So it takes my emotional range from about here to here. And it doesn't dull things as much as one would think. It really just makes days much more manageable for me.
Good. Let me try this, Amy, with you. Should we be encouraging students down the road to slow down their pace of education, maybe take that year off? You know, who knows, for some, maybe it's do a 4-year degree in 5 years or 6 years. Take it at a different pace, because that will, you know, lessen the load. Is that a good idea?
Yeah. Well, when you say we, I think it's important to acknowledge that parents should be the primary speaker in that situation. They should be the ones sending those types of messages to their children, insofar as explaining and first of all, making sure that the child knows that it's okay, you know, to take that time off, that all of the pressure that we're feeling with regards to being obligated to go to university in order to quote unquote succeed in life, and in order to get that high paying job and make every parent proud, is something that I think kids are being told from a very young age, and any deviation from that is seen as a disappointment.
Rhiannon, I got to sort of put a word in here for the parents, though, who sometimes don't know, do I push my kid hard because it's a tough world out there and they got to learn, you know, how to fight for their piece of the action at a young age, because that's the way it's going to be when you get into the real world? Or do I risk, you know, alienating them by doing that? Do I baby them too much if I don't do that? You know, parents are juggling all these balls at the same time. They don't know what to do. What do you recommend?
I think that talking to your child, getting a sense of what they want, where they think they need to go. An example that comes to mind is I taught the son of a woman that my husband works with, and I taught him in his first year here. He was a very good student, very conscientious about doing his homework. But at the end of the year, he decided that university just wasn't for him and that he needed to go find something else to do. And I ran into his mother several months later, and she said, "You need to talk to him. You need to tell him he needs to go back to university." And I said, "Well, I don't know that I can do that. He's following the path that's right for him. You know, he came here, he did his full year of courses, and at the end of the year, he decided he needed to go do something else." And it's pretty hard to argue with that, I think.
That's a tough story, because, you know, that's a perfect example of, on the one hand, what the parents want and what the students want may not be the same thing, and who do you listen to?
Yeah.
I don't know. This program, mind you, never attempts to find answers to everything. We do hope we pose a few good questions along the way. What do you say on this, Arthur?
I just say that we continue educating people against the stigma. I think we need to educate our educators about the stigma, about how to spot signs of mental health. And I think we need to show people that it's okay to have these difficulties, because there's people that are walking around amongst us that have these difficulties. And I don't like calling mental illness an illness, but the fact of the matter is that it is an illness like any other, you know, for example, physical illness. And it's okay, seek treatment, because I think people are doing themselves a favor by seeking treatment rather than letting things go on and without treatment.
This is so troubling to hear in some respects, because, you know, I heard it my whole life. University, college, whatever, ought to be one of the best times of your life. And if it isn't, that's a shame.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I just think they need to realize that educators are there to more than just educate, or at least provide more supports than education
Gotcha.
itself.
Thanks to Amy Epstein, the master's student at Carleton University in Ottawa. Thanks to Rhiannon Dawn at Nipissing University. We're glad you two could be on the line and via Skype with us today. Arthur Gallant, the journalism student, Emma Woolley, writer, web editor. Good to have you two here in our studio as well.
Thank you.